Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. We're excited to welcome back for the second time on the show, Dana Hutchinson. Welcome back, Dana.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Thanks.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Oh, mommy, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
We were just chatting. The Herbalist Hour, we don't typically focus on one specific issue, although I'm inspired now to maybe do that more in the future. So today, I say we're, but actually Dana's going to go in depth on an autoimmune condition known as lichen sclerosus. In fact, we'll link this in the podcast show notes and YouTube description, but Dana's also submitted a video a few months back on lichen sclerosus, so that might be a nice addendum to our conversation today. But I think we're going to go really in depth on the topic. So why don't we start things off by defining, Dana, what is lichen sclerosus?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a condition in the autoimmune realm, which typically affects genital tissue. It can show up on both women, also on men. It can also show up all across the system, primarily externally on the skin. We do see clients who have lichen sclerosus on their arms, their shoulders, the trunk of their body, the legs as well, but most commonly it's showing up on vaginal tissue and also can show up on foreskin tissue. So, really, what it is a collection of skin atrophy presentations. So, we do see symptoms ranging from itchy skin to red irritated tissue. We can see lesions. We can also see extreme pain with intercourse. We can see fusing of labial tissue, fusing of the vulva, fusing of the vaginal opening. So there's a lot of things that we can see which are quite intense.
Yeah.
For those of you listening, I myself have also had this condition, which is why our clinic does specialize in working with it now. And so those are really the main symptoms that we see. We can also see individuals getting biopsies in this area, which can lead to skin atrophy and healing issues, causing more lesions and wounds. So there's a lot within that container, but those are pretty much the main symptoms we see, in addition to probably the most common symptom, which is the white presentation of the skin. Kind of this scaly, thickening presentation that the vulva can present with when someone does have lichen sclerosus.
I noticed you said had the condition, and I would like to get more into that later, as well
Sure.
as diagnosis. But
Mm,
before we get into all that, I was reading up on this a little bit and
yeah.
on lichen sclerosus, and it's classified as like a rare condition. Just curious,
Mhm.
how common is it and are you seeing it being diagnosed more and more these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say working with this condition for over a decade now, it was not as common as it currently is.
Hmm.
It's quite unfortunate, to be honest. Our clinic does see hundreds of patients with this every year, and it's alarming
Yeah.
because I think it once was a rare condition. I know when I had it, physicians didn't even know what it was. They were kind of just saying, I don't know, take an antibiotic, take a steroid, it might go away. Obviously, now a lot of the Western front, the OBGYNs are aware of what this looks like. Most commonly, people aren't even needing biopsies anymore because of how common it is to visually diagnose this condition now.
Hmm.
And so we are seeing a huge, huge uptick in folks being diagnosed with this condition. And I would say I primarily only really worked with women assigned at birth initially. And now we're finding that there's a lot more males assigned at birth that are working with our clinic for LS on the foreskin tissue. So we are seeing it kind of pop up in newer ways, newer landscape. And I have a lot of theories for why, that might be happening. But yes, to answer your question, we are seeing this is not a rare condition anymore.
So it's not necessarily that people are getting LS more often. It's just that they're getting diagnosed with it because we know what it is now.
There's a little bit of that, I would say, that comes into why we're seeing more diagnoses of
Mm-hmm.
it. But I do think symptomatically, we're seeing a lot more symptoms in those regions, which would bring me to kind of my argument that I think it has to be coming as well from external exposures,
Mm.
perhaps things like stress that our bodies are not as replete as they once were. We're more deficient as a society. We're up against a heap of environmental toxins that our body has to sift through. And that's not even, discussing our food supply, which I think can absolutely suppress the gut, which can obviously create havoc for our immune system. So there's a lot of things there, but I do have some thoughts and theories for sure. Yeah.
Is that your theory based on environmental exposure to various toxins and so on?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, lichen sclerosus in general, can most commonly be found in individuals with emotional trauma or a history of emotional grief, sadness, depression. We also commonly see antibiotics, uh, usually happening before someone gets diagnosed with this condition, meaning they're taking it for an infection or a UTI or an illness or something like that. And then we're also seeing, there can be some physical abuse that can also kind of precede a diagnosis like this. And we also see folks who have underlying bacterial overgrowths, viral overgrowths, and mold exposures that we also kind of put in this compiling factors for potentially triggering this condition to present.
Just a quick break from the show to let you know about our herbal monographs page. So if you go to herbrally.com/monographs, you're going to see all sorts of different plant monographs. And basically what a monograph is, if you don't already know, you probably do, but it's a lengthy, well-written description of what a plant is. You're going to learn about its range, its Latin name, its common names, medicinal uses, personal stories a lot of times, because we have a wide variety of herbalists talking about these plants. So if you want to learn about a specific plant, I definitely recommend you go to herbrally.com/monographs, check them out. Some of them are even 20 pages long, some of them are 5 pages long, but they're really unique, and I highly recommend you check it out. Thanks so much, and now back to the show. Are folks born with lichen sclerosus, or does it develop? And kind of on top of that question, before the show, before we jumped on, I was doing some research and I was listening to a podcast
Yeah.
called Between Two Lips, and the guest on there, forgive me, I can't remember her name. I'll leave a link to it in the show notes, but she was mentioning how she had lichen sclerosus, and then her mother actually had multiple sclerosis. So I don't know if there's any link between those two, but yeah, kind of going off of that, do you have any answers to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So MS or multiple sclerosis is also part of the autoimmune realm. We actually work with a lot of patients who do unfortunately have that condition. It's a connective tissue abnormality, of course. Now, LS is also, connective tissue based.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that kind of hereditary line, I always like to first assess or acknowledge the fact that most families are eating the same way. Most families are growing up in the same environments constitutionally. So maybe they're in a damp, cold environment, maybe they're in a dry or hot climate. So they're going to be a little more susceptible to certain classes of diseases, in my opinion. But I do think that you can basically inherit weak DNA. I think that's a total plausible option for having a weaker immune system and being more susceptible to some of these autoimmune presentations that do involve the connective tissue. I wouldn't say that you're necessarily born with a condition like this, although we have unfortunately been a part of some infant cases with LS, which is extremely sad, challenging, and frustrating to work with. So with those cases, I don't know if there's reactions happening to their external stimuli. I don't know if that's more hereditary. debate, or if there's, traumatic themes that happen in the birth that might lead to that already lowering of the immune system in under 1 year of life.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things there, but we usually try to get to the root of 3 to 5 of these things when we're working with any LS patient.
So when you see clients or patients for LS, are they
Yeah.
coming to you already aware of the fact that they have lichen sclerosus, or are you helping them assess that they have LS? How do you assess LS in the Wildflower Clinic?
Yeah, so we get a mix, I would
Okay.
say. More commonly, we are getting folks who get that biopsy in the Western world. Their physicians telling them they have something called lichen sclerosus. They're, kind of worried and stressed and they don't know what this is perhaps, and they're finding us organically because we are one of the only clinics that really specializes in LS across the country right now.
Wow.
We hope there's more, of course, because it is a need, absolutely. And so most people are coming to us saying, hey, I want to work on this naturally. My physician gave me the options of just prescribed steroids for the rest of my life, and maybe that doesn't align with them. So they're looking to our clinic to hopefully figure out how this started and what they can do to maintain and hopefully move into remission.
Mm.
So when we do see a client, first and foremost, we're doing a full health history. We got to figure out timeline, medication use, their history there with antibiotics, birth control, their diet, how they're thinking, their emotional state. And really what we're doing also in addition to that is assessing the body. And so we're not just looking at the health history, the labs, all these things that are still important, but we're also looking at their face. We're
Mm.
looking at their tongue. If it's in office, that's obviously across the table. If they're virtual, they're sending in comprehensive photos. We're feeling the pulse for in-office patients. We're looking at the nails, both in office and virtually. And from the Chinese medicine perspective, which is where the majority of my training and certifications come from, we can glean a lot from just what the body's showing us.
Hmm.
And I know when I was first diagnosed with this, and I shared my story on the last podcast, but when I went to the first Chinese medicine doctor, that was the first piece that he looked at. And I always thought that was so strange. I was like, no, 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 look at my labs, look at my diagnosis. What are you going to do about that? And he was like, I don't need that. I need to see what body systems degraded to allow this immune system deficiency, to allow this really poor emotional state that I was presenting as.
Mm.
And, so looking at the tongue, that's a window into the organ systems of the body, the heart, the lungs, the spleen, stomach, liver, gallbladder, kidney, urinary bladder. And so by looking at certain components of these diagnostic assessments, we can really say, okay, yep, you have LS, absolutely. But every person with LS is going to walk out of here with a totally different protocol because it all is stemming from likely different deficiencies in different organ systems. So that's really kind of how we view each LS case and each autoimmune case, outside of LS, is trying to find where we can make an impact in those certain systems with herbs, with supplements, maybe with lifestyle advice to help them get back to balance.
So every person is an individual, of course. That's definitely a mantra in the herbal community and herbal clinicians. And you did create a serum, which we want to get into more later. Now,
Sure.
you only have one serum for LS, and I have to assume that you're probably giving these to each individual client that you're seeing for LS. But other than that, we're talking about individualized care for them, be it lifestyle factors, nutrition, and the various herbs they might take. Do you have plans? And we could get more into this later when we talk about the serum. But
Yeah.
do you have plans on creating different serums for different LS conditions? I suppose.
Yeah. So we just launched the LS serum this
Okay.
year. And Our in-office or our virtual private clients, they're actually getting custom LS oils. So if you
Oh,
do
wow.
this
Nice.
one-on-one, we're actually looking at your specific symptoms. If you have, you really, the itching symptom for you is your main complaint, we're putting in herbs to, address that, support that. If you're
Mm,
finding that fusing of the tissue is your biggest worry, maybe we're finding we have dry, scaly skin, we're putting in moistening components and some other herbs to support that.
amazing.
With the commercial LS oil, that was obviously formulated to fit the majority of symptoms that LS comes with. We've never really done a mass market product like this in the past. And the reason I even really pushed to create this last year is because we had so many people reaching out just saying, hey, one-on-one maybe isn't for me from a financial perspective or from a time perspective. And is there anything else that I can do? And we were getting so many of these emails that we said, we have to make something else accessible to just calm the inflammation from that external perspective. We got to get people to see that herbal medicine can be used to support some of these really irritating symptoms that do come up with the condition. And so we encourage people to work one-on-one for anything internally as it gets a little bit more complex of where things are coming from. And we work with over 500 herbs in our practice, so there's a ton that we can custom select and craft. But really with the mainstream product, we're so happy with that because it really does, in my opinion, kind of check the boxes of most common symptoms externally with LS.
Okay, yeah, I kind of backed into that. I was like, we'll talk about the serum later, but actually, let's just do it now.
Oh,
Since
yeah.
we're on the topic,
Yeah.
there's 15 herbs in it, correct?
There are 15 herbs.
Yeah.
Yes.
How
Yeah.
did
And
you come up with that formula? I know it's proprietary, and you do list the ingredients on your website, but you give
you.
the prerequisite. These are made by professionals over here, Dana and the crew at the Wildflower Clinic. But how did you come up with the formula?
Yeah. So we launched it this year, but we've actually been using a very similar base formula for probably the last 5 years.
Okay.
So in the last 2 years was when we really started to do some more client testing. We started to play around with some different components of herbs externally from that oil maceration perspective. And so we've actually been testing this for 2 years with actual real LS clients, which has been such a gift to be able
Mm,
to perfect and learn and gain feedback from our own audience, really. So yeah, that's kind of been the creation process. And with the herbs and the formula, we really went ahead with an anti-inflammatory approach, obviously, antiviral approach, moistening components for the skin, also a lot of nutritional components, as well as mineral components to bring kind of those factors back into dry, irritated tissue. A lot of folks also, they're overwashing in that area. They're wearing polyester undergarments. There's a lot of things that we do lifestyle wise that doesn't help skin that's already irritated. And so we also have antifungal components, antibacterial components, and nourishing components. So we really tried to fit, with that 15 herb blend as much as we could without making it too potent for the
mm,
skin to actually be able to absorb it.
okay.
Yeah.
Now, are people using this like tonically every day, or is it more of like an acute situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it varies.
Okay.
The goal is to obviously get clients to not have to use this every day. I
Gotcha.
think if someone's in the initial stages of LS and they do have an irritation picture, they're itching, they're scratching, they have, slits, lesions, cuts, all these kinds of things. I think it would make sense to use morning and night. And that's what we do dose as a recommendation on the bottle.
Okay.
And that's just to primarily get nutrition into that area,
Mm,
help start balancing vaginal pH, a lot of times we'll give our one-on-one clients vaginal pH strips and say, hey, let's see if your microbiome in that area is off. It could be indicative that there's a more serious overgrowth of something that we want to be aware of. So these types of herbs will help that.
Yeah.
Of course, there's also the internal component, the lifestyle stuff is, all herbalists always talk about. But I think this gives you the best chance of creating a new baseline externally so that you can kind of start turning off that pain complex, the inflammation there, so that the body can actually start repairing other areas.
Now, you mentioned vaginally. This also would work for, say, foreskin and other affected areas.
Absolutely. Yes. And we have clients who use it on their breast, stomach, legs, wherever it's really presenting. Of course, although that's helping externally, practitioner wise, we're thinking, where did this come from internally? So that's where it gets a little bit more complex, but understanding that pretty much all external conditions are coming from an internal fire is important. Yeah.
For whatever reason, this just came to me. Dear listener, this is not any sort of paid ad. We just wanted to have Dana on the show to talk about lichen sclerosus. So, but we do definitely recommend Dana's work and her products. So you can learn more at wildflowerclinic.com, and somewhere at the navigation menu you can learn more about the LS serum. But let's keep it rolling here. What else have we not talked about the serum thus far? I did want to ask you, I saw nettle in the ingredients list, and I was just kind of curious, why did you put nettle in there? What part of the plant is that, and what kind of role does it play in the formula?
Totally. So nettle, I actually really like externally. I think a lot of people will look at our formulation and think, wow, a lot of those are used internally only, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's just such a testament to the fact that we don't really have funding to test herbs, right? So a lot of these herbs that are renowned internally, I think we haven't even begun to explore externally and see what their constituents and clinical actions can bring to a health presentation. And so nettle, I think a lot of herbalists, maybe people listening, know it as just such a beautiful, nutrient-rich, mineral-rich leaf, which is the format we have in our oil. And externally, I find that it does the same things. We want to make sure, if we're using nettle externally by itself, for listeners, that you always want to balance it out with some moistening components, because it can be even dry constitutionally externally. But the reason that it's in our oil is because of those really high mineral and nutritional components that help to really re-soothe and bring in those materials into the irritated skin. Yeah.
Awesome. Just to get kind of nerdy on, like, say, the regulatory side, working for Mountain Rose Herbs for so many years in the marketing department, trying to market herbal products in a FDA approved type of way. I'm just kind of curious from that perspective, how has it been creating this product, the LS serum, and has it been difficult for you to, like, say, market it? I do notice you use the language supports LS, which is good. So just kind of curious your perspective on the regulatory aspect of all this.
Absolutely.
The claims and stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you always have to be mindful of that in the herbal world. I'm sure, you talk about that all the time with folks on the podcast. But, with this, we actually work with the Herbal Content Cottage, who does, that's Hannah. And so she's done all of our branding, a lot of our kind of just nitpicking editing for the regulatory purpose, just to make sure that we're not claiming, not saying we're treating, we're not, saying this is going to change your whole life. We guarantee it. So we really had to use that language when making the product, and also with our website and all the kind of ads that we run for that. So that's kind of how we've really navigated that piece. And then, of course, just, the backside of that is just making sure, obviously, with a mass market product, we're making it on commercial grade stainless steel. Everything is SOP'd, or standard operating procedures. We have organic herbs. We have third-party verification for that. So just making sure, even you guys listening, making mass market public products, just have to be on top of all of that. And we've tried our best to do that, of course.
Wonderful. And just an aside, Amanda started doing photography for Herbal Content Cottage.
Oh, well,
So
there you
it's
go.
funny how all these different worlds are colliding
Oh,
here. I love it.
it's all connected.
I forgot that you use Herbal Content Cottage. Yeah, definitely can't recommend their
Oh,
services
yeah,
enough.
yeah, she's great. Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
well, let's delve more into actually one more thing. One more thing about the LS serum, unless you
Yeah.
have anything else you for sure want to cover. But I think it'd be fun if you kind of talked about some of maybe the success stories. I was gonna originally, when I was writing out the questions for this, I was like, "Oh, Dana, tell us about some success stories." Then I went to the Lichen Sclerosus serum page, and you actually have a bunch on there already, and that was very heartening to read. So, why don't you tell us maybe some of the success stories you've heard about?
Definitely. So one thing that we do with all of the folks who order the LS serum is we actually email them handouts that they can also utilize to benefit LS in other ways. So we don't just say, okay, great, here's your oil. We actually send them out a top care guide and also a top product guide from our recommendation, ways that they can start to reduce toxins in their environment, organic underwear links, laundry detergent links, dietary suggestions that we've seen people have success with. So I think that really adds an element of care to the whole process because I know this capitalism world can be crazy and we really want to help people with this condition. We have, so much on our website for additional resources and
That's cool.
support. So even the folks who can't come work with us one-on-one, we're linking them to all of this. We're, pushing them to all these different resources we can flood them with. And I think that makes a huge difference just with the success. Because it's not just, hey, you're going to apply this oil, everything's going to magically heal for you. In a lot of cases, a lot of times you do have to say, hey, also maybe we want to assess our stress, right? We want to assess the medications that we're taking in. Some might be necessary for sure, some might not. Go speak to your physician, right?
Yeah.
How much are we sleeping? Looking at our body and our overall vitality is so much part of taking any product, even if it's external or not. And so we've had a lot of success stories of people even just saying, I had no idea that there was another option, to support my tissue outside of just estrogen creams and clobetasol and steroids, which I'm not saying that you shouldn't use. I think you should use whatever your physician is telling you. But I think it can be really empowering to see that some of these beautiful constituents and herbs can actually nourish skin barrier tissue.
Mm.
And so we get a lot of people saying, wow, this feels so moistening. It feels soothing for the first time. We'll get a lot of clients who say, wow, I'm using this actually as a lubricant for intercourse, and it's been life-changing,
Wow.
and it's really just a maceration of those 15 herbs in organic olive oil. So it's very clean.
Yeah.
And other success stories, I would say people are using it consistently. They're hoping that, it's going to create a new baseline for them. And I think with that success, it's leading them to pursue more natural or alternative approaches for other aspects of their life. So I think it can almost be like a bridge to, wow, that kind of worked for me. And I wonder what else I could maybe alter, change that could help my overall vitality as well.
So, in addition to the serum, what are some lifestyle, dietary, nutritional things that we could do? And then also maybe throw in there some things we should avoid environmentally.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's a great category. It's something I speak a lot about at conferences. I'm
Hmm.
very passionate about empowerment of clients and not just saying, "Oh, I need a pill, I need this tea tincture, this is going to save me." It's that whole holistic approach,
Yeah.
right? And even with the serum, it's worth mentioning the serum's going on the individual or client's body.
Hmm.
That person's body has to do the healing or the nourishing. I'm just providing the product.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to empower that. Absolutely. And I think overall with lifestyle advice, I'm always making sure that people are getting outside enough. People are, really connecting with nature. We are cyclical beings,
Hmm.
and I think a lot, especially of our clientele, has probably drifted away from that connection. So I think that's one of the biggest things we look at is, what does your connection with nature look like? What does your connection with yourself look like? Do you have a practice where you stretch or you do yoga or you read a book, or you do qigong? We have a lot of resources where we guide clients on our website how to do medicinal movement to
That's
open up
cool.
the body. That's a huge piece. If we have a diagnosed condition in Chinese medicine, that means we have a blockage or we have stagnation. The body's not flowing correctly. So we need to figure out how to open that up. So that's probably one of the biggest lifestyle suggestions I give is just, we need to assess how we're doing there. Can we touch our toes? Are we limber? A lot of people would say, no way, right? So that's a big one. I think, when you start looking at what's fueling the body, that's an even bigger category, right? And I get a lot of clients who say, oh, yeah, I've been eating great for the last 4 months, so I don't need any help there, and I say, hey, that's great. No, I'm really happy for you. But let's look at how we've been eating the last 30 plus years, right? And seeing what some of these foods might have done to their system from, again, that stagnation or inflammation perspective. We usually see LS clients with leaky gut syndrome, where, they've damaged the permeability of their gut lining. And this has led to, leaky gut 101, where we have foodborne bacteria, viruses, pathogens leaking into the bloodstream, involving the innate immune system, which thus can lead to an autoimmune presentation. So we have to look at foods that nourish the gut. In some instances, we will look at recommendations for amino acid supplementation like L-glutamine if we think the gut barrier has been compromised to that extent. We're looking at high antioxidant foods, the leafy greens, the brassicaceae. Most people are getting 1 to 2 servings of vegetables a day, for whatever reason. But obviously, we try to guide people into increasing that number so that your body can use that fuel to repair.
Mm.
Other things we really look at is, talked about nutrition. We talked about energetics. Supplementation can come up. Herbs can come up for sure. But I think another huge one is just your environment, which is, another empowering piece for those listening. It's not just, hey, we got to go get this herb. It's some of the things I mentioned, which is, what are the clothes you're wearing? Are we wearing polyester? And can we work towards maybe getting a smaller closet with more sustainable or organic clothing pieces that are going to actually not put toxins onto our system? What are we brushing our teeth with? Do we have root canals, which is a whole nother topic? Do we have kind of all these other exposure signs of maybe a chemical overload? I know in a lot of my younger teen clients or my young women, they're using so many products, right? So instructing, maybe for those listening, I'm sure this has come up on your podcast, but maybe looking at the environmental working group before selecting your next shampoo or your next, face oil or your next deodorant, right? And looking at, are we dyeing our hair? What's our EMF exposure, which is the AirPods, the Aura Ring, the Apple Watch. It's constant tracking. So not that all of these things need to change, but it's just those listening, assessing your overall toxin load, I think can be so empowering and such a wonderful place to start with any diagnosed condition or health symptom.
You mentioned you have resources on your website for, like, say, organic underwear, etc. Can you provide that link for us so we can include it in the podcast show notes?
Yeah, so that's actually our LS handouts. And
Oh, the sell us handout.
I'm happy to provide those for the show notes. Absolutely. And
That
that
would be
does
amazing.
links for everyone listening, which is just, that next step of kind of starting your phase one with this condition. It doesn't have to be the end of your life. I know I thought it was for me,
Yeah.
and I just needed someone to say, hey, you have to realize what's happening. And once you
Hmm.
realize what's happening, I think you can build such a more concise roadmap on how to move away from that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Since it is so rare, I didn't really know about this until you did that video for HerbRally's YouTube channel, and it just sounds like a brutal situation to be in. So it's so amazing that you're out there educating, offering
Yeah.
these products, offering this information up. And in research for this episode, I went on Reddit and just typed in herbs for lichen sclerosus, and
Yeah.
there was a mix between a very hopeful outlooks that their diagnosis can be helped, and then
Mhm.
others were like, there's no way out of this, you have to take steroids
Yeah.
for the rest of your life. And I just thought reading
Yeah.
between the two different perspectives was interesting. And can you just offer some words of encouragement out there to folks that maybe think that this is impossible for you to go into remission? Yeah, just
Yeah.
curious about that.
Oh, for sure. And I'm an open book. All my
Yeah.
clients say you can't really work with this condition and not be an open book.
Yeah, right.
And what I would say with that is everyone's story is so unique. Everyone's story is so variable. So many people are going to have certain things that align with their beliefs more. So I even have clients who do choose to take that Western route for sure. And they want supplementation with herbs on, kind of just to balance them out. So always support all folks, but I think there's a lack of understanding this condition in most Western offices. That's not to say all of them, but I think with that lack of understanding the origin of this condition or what body systems might need a bit more work, I think that then lies the very minimal suggestions of what you can use for this condition. It can feel quite limiting. It can feel like there's no other route.
Hmm.
And so what we try to offer folks is not, hey, we got the better option at all, but there are so many things we can do to address a health condition. And I think that's really motivating to people when I first take a client on is I say, we've got phases coming up. We have avenues we can turn to. We can look at underlying stool testing. We can look at heavy metal testing. We can start looking at your emotional state in a more deeper lens. We can look at energetic imbalances. And that's not to say that there's more. That means you have to do all of that. I say that because I think you have more avenues you can explore. It doesn't feel like there's just one immunosteroid that you get to apply. And if it doesn't work, well, that's all we have. I think alternative medicine seeks to find so many other ways that might work with that particular individual's body. Because,
Hmm.
like I said, if I have 5 LS clients, they're all going home with different things, different remedies, different things that are going to support their body. Where, as you see on the chats, the Facebook groups, all these kinds of things, there's really kind of 1 to 2 options. It's estrogen creams and it's immunosuppressants, steroids in various forms. And I think that can feel really scary, especially as we estimate about 30% of people who try clobetasol have allergic reactions to it. We see it.
That's
So you
high.
see that on the chats where people say, I had an allergic reaction. This made my LS so much worse. I now have no other options. And so I think that is where herbalists know this who are listening. We kind of get those people who say, I found your website. I have no idea where to turn and everything else has kind of failed me. So what can you do? And so that's where I think myself, other people who work with LS, we try to offer more options for people to turn to and give them hope because there is hope. This condition can absolutely be reversed in my own personal opinion. I've done it myself. We see it all the time with our clients. It's not to guarantee that it's an 100%, remission rate, but we do see it very commonly.
So you would say you're in 100% remission as of now.
I would,
Yeah,
yes.
that's
I
amazing.
absolutely would, and it's
It's changed your life.
oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's why, I sympathize with folks. I've been there. I
Yeah.
couldn't work for 3 months. I didn't have
Jeez.
intercourse for 2 years.
Wow. Oh my
My
gosh.
husband now is
Yeah.
we've been together for 13 years and he's an
Yeah.
angel, but it can cause marriage issues for
Sure.
some people. It can cause self-confidence issues. I mean, you're being robbed of something that's kind of a innate gift that we have to be intimate. And
Yeah.
so my heart goes out to those individuals. I've been there.
Yeah.
And I think that allows me to understand emotionally how big of a journey that is outside of the physical issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I know you and I wanted to talk about some herbs also. So why don't we talk about herbs for lichen sclerosis? Maybe choose your top five. Maybe talk about
Yes.
your card deck a little bit.
Yeah, so I brought some herbs in
Awesome.
to show everyone visually, or actually just the card of them, but they're actually herbs that are in the oil also, since
Oh,
I
sweet.
talked about kind of how all these herbs can be used both internally and externally. I thought that would be really helpful for viewers to just hear that.
Hmm.
So I'll go through them, quickly, of course, but the first one is Dan Shen, and that is red sage. So I love this herb. It is incredibly anti-inflammatory, and that's why it's in our oil. But it's also a great herb for just generally reducing inflammation. You usually find it in the heart Shen category because it can also support the heart, the Shen spirit, and also just the emotional state. The other thing I'll say of this herb is when I ask people who have LS, do you have any stress? If people say no, I say, well, what about the stress of having LS? And they say, oh, yeah, actually, and it is, with
Yeah.
autoimmunity is, you're being diagnosed with something. And I think in the Eastern world, we really view that as a trauma that
Mhm.
you are going through. And so red sage, which is one of our herbs from our card deck, which is another little product we released this year, helping people to learn about herbs from an educational card deck perspective. This is a great one that's quite safe for the public. Obviously, you have to check every herbal recommendation with your physician, medications. Don't take herbs if you're pregnant or lactating. But I think this can be a really great one for people to keep in mind. The next one is actually licorice root, which is one of the first herbs that was in a cream recommended for me when I had LS about 13, 14 years ago now. And I think the reason why that helped me so much is because it's so antiviral. It also boasts antibacterial properties, and it's also moistening. So for me, I had, really dry, cracked, irritated skin. So applying that externally was fantastic. And then from an internal perspective, I took that because it actually helped to warm the interior of my body. I'm cold constitutionally for those listening. Maybe you align. So I really needed to warm my blood. I need to nourish my body. And licorice really helped me with that. Um, the third one is peony root. So Bai Shao and TCM. I like this herb because internally it supports the liver meridians. It supports the gut. It helps the body to stay moist, really keep an anti-inflammatory approach. So that's also externally used for those reasons as well. Moliha, which is jasmine. I talked about this one in the YouTube video that I put up for herbs for lichen sclerosus. So definitely go check that out as well. This one I really like because it has so many minerals and nutritional components. It floods the body with vitamin A, C, E, and it's also wonderful internally for the emotional state. So again, a lot of these herbs I picked are not just physical. They're also to help the central nervous system so people don't hypersecrete cortisol or adrenaline, which usually happens in a lot of presentations. And then the last one is just chrysanthemum. I love chrysanthemum. It is a wonderful herb externally to soothe and moisten. It's great for sores or wounds, which a lot of people get with LS. So it helps to kind of pacify and calm those irritated red presentations. And then internally, it's probably my favorite herb for dissipating internal infections. So just gently scrubbing, excess bacteria, excess viral load, excess funguses. It helps to kind of move those things through the system. So it can be incredibly helpful for people who have not only LS, but maybe that leaky gut, that kind of overgrowth presentation.
So with each of these herbs, are you recommending folks make teas, decoctions out of them, or maybe tinctures or whatever they're going to actually consume?
Yeah, so on our card deck, we actually give doses,
Nice.
suggested
Sweet.
doses, of course. With all of these, you can use them in tincture format, which is probably the easiest to get started, I would
Yeah.
say. Decoction wise, you can definitely use peony. You could definitely use red sage, as those are roots.
Mm.
Um, Jasmine is such a beautiful tea
Yeah.
for those listening, that just really calms the nervous system. It promotes clarity. It really supports the flow of blood. So I actually love drinking jasmine when I'm working or, trying to just focus but not get too stressed.
Right.
And then chrysanthemum, you could also put in a tea as well. It's just quite bitter, so you might want to add a little bit of licorice to that infusion to just balance that out.
Amazing. Yeah, I haven't really consumed chrysanthemum before. I gotta give that a
Oh,
go. Yeah. Is
it's
that very
it's
popular in TCM or?
it is,
Okay,
yeah. And
awesome.
with respiratory infections, the two main herbs that most Eastern medicine practitioners use is chrysanthemum
Mm,
and also honeysuckle.
okay,
Yes, we use that a lot
amazing.
over the last couple of years, and good ones to keep in mind or learn more about for this time of year moving into the cold winter. Yeah.
Amazing. And folks, again, that's wildflowerclinic.com. That's under the shop tab, right? Yep. Ancient
Yep.
30 card deck. So definitely check that
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, that's this guy. So
It's beautiful.
it's beautiful. Really happy with it. It's just our top 30 clinically recommended herbs that you can start learning about so that you can harness, more knowledge in the natural realm. That's why it was created. So,
Heck yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so we got the card deck. Are there other resources, podcasts, YouTube channels, books, etc., that specifically focus around lichen sclerosis or autoimmune diseases that you'd like to, shout out or recommend?
That's interesting. I don't know of any off the top of my head, which is not a good thing. There needs to be more of that.
Sure.
It's tough.
Yeah.
There's a lot of groups I'm a part of, I guess I
Hmm.
would say,
Oh yeah.
more like Facebook groups, summit communities. Folks with MS, there's a wonderful local group in Colorado under Matt Rowe, which is just kind of like the MS summit. There's, a lot of support groups for celiac and LS on Facebook and meetup groups and things like that. In terms of actual education, I usually default people to other podcasters like Dr. Axe, Dr. Will Cole, Mark Hyman does a lot of great stuff on autoimmunity, just generally. Same with Dr. Stephen Cabral. We actually run our labs through his services. So I love his stuff. I think he gives a lot of great basic foundational knowledge that people can get on board with. And then, of course, on that hormonal side, which we just didn't have time to talk about, there's so much with LS,
Yeah.
is, of course, Guru Aviva Ram. She does a lot of podcast work on just how to track your cycle, how to figure out, if you have a hormonal imbalance, adrenal imbalance, and what to look for there. Yeah.
Aviva's been on the show. Did you know that, Dana?
Oh, I did
Yeah,
not. That's
yeah, she
amazing.
was definitely up there with some of the guests I want to talk to. I was like, I gotta chat with
Oh,
Aviva because I've emailed back and forth with her for like 10 years, but I've never actually had a conversation. She's fantastic though.
oh, of course.
Uh,
She's incredible.
she's an
So
OG.
definitely an OG.
Well,
So
you mentioned the hormonal aspect. I don't know if there's a few minutes where you do want to kind of cover some of that before we wrap up and get out of here.
Yeah,
I still have
totally.
time, so
Great, great. Yeah.
yeah.
And really what I meant there is sometimes with an LS presentation, again, it depends on each person, right? You start going through health history, there can be, amenorrhea where someone hasn't menstruated in years. There can be someone who's in perimenopause and they're 35. There
Okay.
can be somebody who's trying to conceive and maybe they've gone through 3 to 4 rounds of IVF and then they have an LS diagnosis. So sometimes there can be a hormonal component to cases, absolutely. And so I think that's where we're really assessing from a female, their menstrual cycle. We're looking at the clotting, the breast sensitivity, different types of cramping, and that indicates certain things. We're also assessing the skin, which can be a huge indicator of a hormonal imbalance or an overproduction as
Hmm.
well. And so, in those instances, I think hormonally supporting someone to either menstruate or to harmonize menstruation can be incredibly helpful, even for an inflammatory autoimmune condition. Yeah.
Okay. I guess my last question for you is, are you currently seeing clients? Are you taking on new clients?
Yes, we
Okay.
are.
Okay.
So my next availability is not until April at this
Okay.
stage, but we are taking new clients for April. Might be a little bit before that, just depending on my schedule. But we also do have another clinician at the practice at the moment. Her name's Annalise, and she is also seeing clients. She has incredible education. She's worked with us for the last 4 years, and so she also does work one-on-one with clients. She does have a little bit more availability and absolutely does address LS as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about LS or anything in general before we get out of here?
Gosh. I mean, I think just people listening with LS, I would just kind of like to mention, emotionally, I think that's probably the biggest area to address the mindset. I know with my personal diagnosis, it happened when my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. She ended up passing away. There were a lot of other emotional pieces in my life,
Mm.
which I think were fully part of this diagnosis for me. In terms of pillars, I don't think it was the only thing, but I'm not saying that that can just be erased, but I think supporting yourself with self-care and a community and these outlets that can help balance your mind and your emotional state will help your LS more than you probably think. So I would kind of leave individuals with that, as I know it's a physical condition, right? So a lot of people think we got to fix the physical side, and Eastern medicine comes in and just says, well, what about the mind? Are we motivated? Have we lost faith? Have we lost hope? Those are going to be the toughest cases. And I know it's hard when you're physically in pain. Maybe you can't walk, maybe you can't sit. It's not easy to recommend, but I think moving the mind to a space where you still have empowerment, maybe you can still move, maybe you can walk. I think that is where you start, and that's where you build on if maybe you don't do any of the physical things at this stage. That will help for sure.
Well, thank you for all of that.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry you went through all of that, Dana, and
It's
I'm grateful that you are out here again, just educating folks, providing high quality products, your client services, and all of the above. So yeah, just thank you, and really appreciate you coming on the show, diving deep on LS with all of us, and
first.
hope you all got
Yeah.
a lot out of this episode. I'm sure you did. Feel free to reach out to Dana. I don't know if you want to plug your email or anything like that, but again, it's
Yeah.
wildflowerclinic.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will for sure make those handouts
That'd be
public for
awesome.
everyone. I just
Thank you.
want people to read those and check out. I'm actually not affiliated with any of those links, but I just
Okay.
want people to actually get good products. It's hard to find. Um, I guess the only other thing I would mention for
Sure.
people is with caffeine, use
Mm.
caution. Use caution if you have an
Little
autoimmune
pro
condition,
tip.
because it might be stimulating you more than you think. And also the other big kind of pro tip is if you have an autoimmune condition and you think that maybe gluten, dairy, soy, corn, one of these things is a trigger for you, if you have that in your diet every 8 days, that is enough to keep that immunoglobulin triggering your autoimmune condition. So even when people say, "Oh, I've reduced, my dairy, I've reduced my gluten," I say, "That's great." But it still could be.
You're so encouraging.
It still could be part of the reason that things are being triggered, and we're results driven here. And of course we want to, align with the human element of things are hard to change.
Yeah.
But if you're ready to change, just start thinking about some of these things and seeing what's possible for you to reduce or implement. Yeah.
Nice little pro tips to wrap up the show there.
Totally.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Dana, once again for joining us on the Herbalist Hour. And we'll see y'all in the next episode.
Okie doke. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for watching today's episode of the Herbalist Hour. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want more great herbal content, be sure to subscribe to our HerbRally YouTube channel. If you enjoy these Herbalist Hour episodes and you'd like to join us live, you can do so by becoming an HerbRally Schoolhouse member. Learn more at herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And if you want to get your first 30 days for free, use coupon code YouTube30 at checkout. So our HerbRally Schoolhouse members get access to exclusive video classes, monographs, and a lot more herbal community discounts, along with joining these live Herbalist Hour interviews. So one more time, herbrally.com/schoolhouse. Enter coupon code YouTube30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, we'll see you in the next episode and take care.